I'd like you to read this. And now imagine what it would be like if you could not. Imagine sitting down to read your newspaper, your online news feed, and all the letters move around. You can't even read the title of the paper. How would that feel? And now imagine you're 7 or you're 8 years old, and you're sitting in a classroom, and all of your friends can write their names. And although your name is only 4 letters, after 2 years at school, you still cannot write it. You can't read the simple storybooks that are given to you, and you can't do your schoolwork because you can't read the instructions and you can't write the answers. Imagine what this feels like. We have labeled this severe difficulty learning to read as dyslexia. In English-speaking countries, it affects 10% of people, many of you perhaps. And with children, it's 1 in 10 children. 1 in 10 children need intensive, specific intervention if they're going to become literate adults in reading and writing. So Albert Einstein, Agatha Christie, arguably one of the best writers of English fiction, not to mention Pablo Picasso, Erin Brockovich, and even Carol Grader. She's the head of molecular biology and genetics at Johns Hopkins. They all have dyslexia. Imagine a world without the contribution of millions of people like that. So Albert and Agatha, they were the lucky ones. Somebody took the time and the effort and helped them to learn to read and write. And this little boy, he was a lucky one. He's my son. So he started kindergarten, and he looked a bit like this picture. He was bright, he was articulate, he loved being read to, and he could almost beat me at a game of chess, and I'm not a half bad player. Move forward to grade 2. He looked like this. He was a little boy with a 4-letter name who still could not spell it. He couldn't do his schoolwork, he couldn't follow the instructions in the classroom. And so he would memorize books and then spew them back, but he had no idea how to read or write. And he came up with ingenious ways to be expelled from school almost daily so that I would have to take him home. By grade 4, despite all the efforts and patience at the school, I pulled him out and I put him in a specialty school for children with dyslexia. And he spent 2 years there learning to read and write, intensive training. He also spent time there rebuilding his self-esteem and dealing with the severe anxiety, crippling anxiety related to schooling. Unfortunately, most children who have dyslexia do not have access to this kind of support. They don't have a school nearby that specializes in dyslexia. They don't have parents that can twice a day drive them across the city and back. They don't have the resources for private school or private tutors, hundreds of hours. And the public schools just don't have these kinds of tutors available and the kind of time needed to help kids. As a result, many children with dyslexia never become fully literate, even as adults. So what causes dyslexia? Well, it's not actually maple syrup, but one of the primary challenges children have with dyslexia is they cannot hear the sounds that letters make. This is called phonological awareness. And as well, there's rules that govern which sounds and which letters go together, and that's called the alphabetic principle. There's a whole series of rules that go with that. And children with dyslexia have a really tough time learning those two things. And so here in the example, maple is spelled phonetically, M-A-P-U-L, rather than following any rules of spelling. And if you're wondering about the second part of the sentence, what he's basically written is that maple syrup is quintessentially Canadian. It's made from maple leaves, he says. A lot of children with dyslexia have attentional challenges. They seem to go together, hard to say which came first. And so they can't pay attention to the sounds they need to. They don't notice when the letters get added that change the other sounds in a word. And these kids are bright. A lot of them are average to above average intelligence. So there's attentional challenges here too. So just to give you an example, in this exercise, my young son, and he's an avid fan of biology. In fact, hopefully, if he passes grade 12, he's about to do genetics at university next year. So he's drawn a really complex picture of a biome. It shows a lake, it's got somebody fishing, it's got a duck with her feet dangling. A little kid drew this picture of feet dangling in the water. There's a big fish nosing the feet, so maybe a pike about to nibble on the toes. There's eggs. The turtles, the frogs may have laid them. So it's very complex for someone his age. And then when he's asked to write what a freshwater biome is, all he can manage to get out, and it's difficult to even understand what he's written, is that a freshwater biome are home to lots of animals. That's it. This is a child who could talk about what goes on in a tide pool for 20 minutes. In this another example, drawing of salmon swimming upriver. They're spawning under the cover of fir trees. And again, all he can write is that salmon move their bodies. That's all he can manage, and every single word is spelt incorrectly. This is his experience at school. So people ask me if dyslexia impacts all people across all languages, and the answer is no. It turns out that it's worse in English. English is a particularly difficult language because it's opaque, which means that a single letter can make different sounds. So in circle, at the beginning of the word, it makes the S sounds because the I follows it. That's one of those rules. And then at the end, it makes a hard C sound, circle, because another rule which has the consonant and the E there. So this is what you need to learn to read and write. Except there's more sounds, like the event you're at, which is Kai light, but you might also want to pronounce it chi or chai. So English is particularly difficult. So we have a higher incidence of dyslexia. There, of course, have been software systems that have been developed to help children struggling to learn to read and write, and some of these have been implemented across entire school districts. The challenge with that is twofold. One is, well, the goal is to automate some of this feedback and repetitive practice, so you need less tutoring hours, in the hope that that will help them. But the problem is that most of these systems have not been empirically tested. We don't actually know that they work. And they rely on a keyboard like this one, either on a tablet or on a laptop or a desktop. And the keyboard is also problematic. So most of you might know this little piece of history, but this keyboard is known as QWERTY, and it's the first letters Q, W, E, R, T going across. And it was designed with the placement of letters to optimize separation of any letters that appeared together in a physical typewriter so that the little manual levers wouldn't jam. So letters that appear together are always separated in space. And as such, it offers no clue about what letters should go together to a young child who's trying to learn to read and write. In addition, many children with dyslexia have poor fine motor skills as well, and they don't process symbols very well. So we're mashing together trying to learn to read and write, which is already challenging with them, with trying to learn to use a keyboard, which is definitely not designed for them. I work in a field called tangibles, user interfaces, and that's just a fancy way of saying that we can take objects from everyday life, like these letters, and we can actually augment them with computation. So we can use them as input to a computer system, and then we can actually display things as output through the letters. And this really widens up the range of things that you can do with a computational system. So for us, we use the physical letters as an input to a reading app, and then we can actually use the letters themselves, and the color inside the letters can change as an output device instead of a screen. So we built a tangible user interface. It's called PhonoBlocks. It runs on a touch tablet, has 42 of these three-dimensional letters, and a few things about them. They stand up, so the P and the D and the Q and the letter reversals are not going to happen. You can tell them apart. They are used by placing them in slots on a word-making platform like this. So no keyboard, we're doing it this way. The letters have a little physical notch, so you can only put them the right ways. You can't have B and D get reversed. And then the letters snap into place with a magnet, the electronics connect, and that information gets sent to the app, which runs on a tablet. And this is the really interesting part, what happens is these letters will change colors to indicate the sounds that the letters are making in the word. So in this very simple example here, we have a consonant, vowel, consonant, And what happens is the I is yellow for a short vowel sound, and we've got the green and the blue, H and the T. So what that tells a child is this I is going to make the short I sound, and there are 3 sounds in the word because there are 3 colors in the word. And so they can swipe across the screen one way and they can hear the word hit, and they can swipe across the screen the other way and they can hear the 3 sounds of the H and the I and the T and the sound they're making. So that was a very simple rule, but it's one of the first they have to learn. This one's a little more complex, so as we start to spell and we put it the A, G and the A and the M, so at this point the A is going to be yellow. It's a soft sound, a short vowel sound. But as we add the trailing E on, the system, the E and the A will flash red to draw their attention to it, and the A is going to change to red, which indicates that it's actually a hard A sound, and then the E is going to go transparent to show that it's no longer active in the word. So the key thing here is that we use our system to draw children's attention to the moment when adding a letter changes the sounds in a word, and we use color to provide information about that. The system can be used by very flexible way by tutors, and then we have a very structured practice mode where kids can get that digital feedback and we optimize on software in that way. So I presented this research at this conference last year, and one of the studies we focused on worked with a small group of young children in Canada, and so these are kids that have failed to learn these rules in the classroom, in pull-out groups, and with tutors. So they have failed at 3 levels of intervention, and that's who we get to work with. And so we worked with them over 6 weeks, and we tried to teach them 6 rules of both reading and spelling. You have to learn it both ways. And one of my grad students, who's a design student, not a dyslexia tutor, sat down with them for 30 minutes a week and spent some time with the kids learning, teaching the kids practicing both reading and writing. So 30 minutes a week for one of these rules is nothing. It's almost no time at all. They've spent all of kindergarten, grade 1, and part of grade 2, and they're still not learning it. So what happens? Well, with reading, before phonoblocks, their average accuracy, and there's lots of variability in the data, to read 40 words was about 50%. And after our 6-week intervention, they were able to read almost 90% of the words they'd learned with our system. But that's not actually good enough. We now need to test them, we want to test them on new words, words that they don't know how to read, to see if they can transfer. That's very important in learning. Can they take what they've learned, transfer it to a new set of words? And you see those in turquoise in the middle column, and what you see is there's almost no difference. So they can transfer their knowledge. The second piece that's just exciting is the follow-up test. So that's the 3rd set of columns. And so we go away for our 2 months or 6 weeks, and we come back and we give them the same words we taught them and then another set of words, and we see the same accuracy. So this is called maintenance, where they're learning stuck. We get transfer and maintenance, which means they're going to continue with this, and as they continue to read, they get ongoing reinforcement. So we see the same results for spelling. We have fewer words because it takes a lot longer to spell, but basically the identical pattern happens over time here. So as researchers were really interested in this outcome. It was very positive. It was really exciting, actually, to see that we could do this. But as designers, which I'm also a design researcher, I wanted to know how and why this has happened. And I had some ideas about that. But in order to figure that out, we actually videotaped all of the sessions, and we coded all of the sessions, and we looked for key design features that could explain this remarkable success of the children. So here's some of the things we found out. The letters are physical. Children handle them, they trace them. We pay attention to what's in our hands, and if I'm trying to hold a pencil with poor motor skills, that's what I'm paying attention to if I'm learning to write. Here, they're paying attention to the letters. Sounds simple, but actually quite important. Another feature of the 3D letters is that children can sort and organize and group them. So what you see on the top is they've actually separated out all the consonants and all the vowels, and on the bottom they separated all the vowels and put the R beside them for, it's called the R-controlled vowel rule. And so this is called an epistemic action, this sorting and organizing the physical world, which is going to make the mental task easier later for them. And so they can do that. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that they can try out the letters offline, so on the table without putting them in the word-making platform, and they try things out. Now contrast this to writing on a piece of paper or typing in something on a keyboard where every mistake is obvious. Here, they can experiment in a safe environment, and when they're ready, they can put it on the word-making system and they can see how they're doing. The last thing, this was the one thing I really didn't expect, was that we noticed when children were first learning a word, and she's learning the TH and the SH digraphs here, very slow, she's placing them one at a time and thinking about it and trying to get it right. And then what happens, this little thing goes like this, and they start using both hands quickly, sometimes crossing their hands over, sometimes not. And you see learning in real time. So whoever's working with them, whether it's a tutor or one of my grad students, knows that moment where they've got it, and they can reinforce that. They can see learning in real time. So in summary, our big idea was that actually by getting physical, using 3D physical letters that have this embedded dynamic color cues, we can improve children's attention, and we can leverage their visual-spatial skills, which are often very strong, and these kids think Picasso or Einstein, and we can also leverage their motor skills at an age-appropriate letter in helping them overcome the challenges they're having learning to read and write. So in doing so, we've created a solution, and we're still refining it and working on it, but it could be distributed into schools that would help millions of children in opaque languages learn to read and write and become fully literate adults. Thank you.